Just before midnight, radar operators at Washington National Airport noticed 7 unidentified objects entering the airspace above the Capitol. The blips moved across the radar scope near the White House, the Capitol building, and some of the most sensitive and heavily guarded locations in the United States. Within hours, the Air Force launched fighter jets to intercept them. But before the pilots could reach the area, every single object disappeared from the radar screens. Then, as the jets turned back toward their base, the objects returned. This was not a distant sighting over a remote desert. This was July 1952, and something was repeatedly entering the skies above Washington, D.C., and the United States military could not explain what it was. To understand why this event shook the country, you have to understand what America felt like in the summer of 1952. The Cold War was intensifying with every passing month. The Soviet Union had successfully tested nuclear weapons, and military planners were seriously preparing for the possibility that enemy bombers could appear over American cities with little or no warning. At the same time, reports of strange objects in the sky were increasing across the country, and the phenomenon had become impossible for officials to ignore. The Air Force had recently established Project Blue Book, a formal investigation into UFO sightings, tasked with determining whether these reports represented any threat to national security. Its records are held today by the U.S. National Archives. But among all the locations where strange objects might appear, no airspace was more sensitive than Washington. The sky above the White House and the Capitol was not just another part of the map. It was the symbolic and political heart of the United States, protected by layers of military infrastructure. So when unknown radar targets appeared there in the middle of the Cold War, they could not simply be dismissed. And on the night of July 19th, that is exactly what happened. Shortly before midnight on Saturday, July 19, 1952, radar operators in the darkened control room at Washington National Airport began noticing unusual returns on their screens. At first, the contacts might have been dismissed as technical glitches, stray reflections, equipment noise, the ordinary imperfections of 1950s radar technology. But then additional targets appeared. Some seemed to drift slowly across the scope. Others reportedly changed direction or accelerated in ways the operators found difficult to reconcile with any known aircraft. Most unsettling of all, the objects appeared near restricted areas around central Washington, airspace where nothing should have been flying at that hour. The controllers did what trained professionals do. They contacted other facilities to determine whether anyone else was seeing the same thing. And the answer came back. Additional radar operators at nearby installations were also tracking unexplained contacts. There were reports of strange lights as well, seen by airline pilots and observers on the ground in the Washington area. Nobody in those control rooms knew what they were looking at. The targets might have been aircraft, equipment failure, unusual weather, or something else entirely. But because this was Washington, hesitation was not an option. Military authorities made the call, and fighter jets were ordered into the air. What happened next would become the strangest part of the entire story. The interceptors climbed into the night sky and flew toward Washington to investigate the unknown targets. The pilots scanned the darkness, guided by the radar operators on the ground. But as the fighters approached the area, something remarkable happened. The radar contacts disappeared. One moment the scopes showed multiple unidentified targets. The next, the screens were clean. The pilots searched the airspace over the Capitol and found nothing they could identify. Eventually, with fuel burning and no clear target to pursue, the jets began returning to base. And then came the detail that would haunt this case for decades. As the fighters withdrew, the unknown contacts started appearing on the radar screens again. To the operators watching in real time, the sequence was chilling. It seemed as though the objects had vanished the moment the fighters arrived, and returned once the danger had passed. Now, to be clear, that pattern does not prove the targets were intelligently controlled. Radar propagation can change from minute to minute, and coincidence is always possible. But in that control room, in the middle of the night, it created a deeply disturbing possibility. Whatever the operators were tracking might have known the jets were coming. One strange night could still have been written off as a malfunction. The problem was what happened 7 days later. On the night of Saturday, July 26th, the mystery returned to Washington. Radar operators once again reported unidentified targets moving through the restricted airspace around the Capitol. Once again, the contacts appeared near the most sensitive locations in the city. And once again, fighter aircraft were scrambled to investigate. This time, some pilots reported seeing unexplained lights in the night sky. Others searched the same areas and found nothing at all. Throughout the night, the radar targets appeared, disappeared, and reappeared as if taunting the men trying to track them. But by this point, the story had escaped the control room entirely. Reporters had learned of the first incident, and now, with the second wave of sightings, the press seized on the story. Newspapers across the country ran dramatic front-page headlines declaring that flying saucers had appeared over the capital of the United States. The public wanted answers to an uncomfortable question. How could unidentified objects repeatedly enter Washington's airspace, the most defended sky in America, without being intercepted or even explained? What had begun as a strange radar event was rapidly becoming a national crisis of confidence. And the timing for the United States Air Force could hardly have been worse. Americans in the summer of 1952 were already anxious about Soviet technology, nuclear war, and the possibility of a surprise attack on their homeland. Now the newspapers were filled with stories about unknown objects flying freely over the White House and the Capitol. The implication was terrifying, no matter how you read it. Either American radar systems, the same systems meant to warn of incoming Soviet bombers, were unreliable, or unidentified craft had penetrated the country's most protected airspace, while the military stood powerless to stop them. Neither possibility was acceptable. Under intense public pressure, the Air Force organized a major press conference at the Pentagon, one of the largest since the Second World War. Major General John Samford, the Director of Air Force Intelligence, stepped in front of the cameras to address the nation, and his statement became part of the National Archives' official UFO records. The country was waiting. The Air Force now had to explain what Washington had witnessed. The official explanation centered on the weather. The Air Force argued that the radar contacts were most likely caused by unusual atmospheric conditions, specifically a phenomenon called a temperature inversion. During an inversion, a layer of warm air sits above cooler air near the ground. Under the right conditions, this layered atmosphere can bend and distort radar signals, causing ordinary objects and even features on the ground to appear as false targets on the scope. The same atmospheric effects can distort distant lights, making stars, conventional aircraft, or lights on the ground appear to hover, dart, and move in strange ways. It was a plausible scientific explanation. Radar technology in 1952 was far from perfect. Washington was suffering through hot, humid summer weather, exactly the conditions that produce inversions. And some of the reported movements could easily have been exaggerated by radar interference or human misinterpretation. But the explanation did not satisfy everyone. There had been reports from multiple trained radar operators at separate facilities. There had been visual observations from pilots in the air and witnesses on the ground. And the incidents had occurred across 2 separate weekends, not one isolated night. The weather explanation could account for part of the mystery. The question that lingered then and now was whether it explained all of it. Over the decades that followed, the Washington incident became wrapped in layers of exaggeration and legend. Some retellings claim that enormous spacecraft hovered directly above the White House lawn. Others describe the event as nothing less than an attempted alien invasion. The historical evidence supports neither claim. What is actually documented is more restrained, but it is still remarkable. Unusual radar contacts were reported by professional operators. Military fighter jets were launched to investigate them. The events repeated across 2 separate weekends. The story dominated national headlines and forced the Air Force to publicly account for what had happened over its own capital. Years later, Project Blue Book concluded that its UFO investigations had found no evidence of extraterrestrial vehicles or of technology beyond known scientific principles. That conclusion is worth stating precisely. It does not mean that every individual sighting was fully explained and resolved. It means the Air Force found no evidence supporting the extraordinary explanation. Between those two statements lies the space where this mystery has lived for more than 70 years. So maybe nothing extraordinary entered Washington's airspace in July 1952. Maybe unusual weather, imperfect radar, distant lights, and the raw anxiety of the Cold War combined to create one of the most convincing UFO incidents in American history. But that explanation does not change what happened inside those control rooms. Trained radar operators watched unidentified targets appear near the center of the United States government. Fighter jets were launched to intercept them. The targets vanished. And when the jets moved away, they came back. More than 70 years later, the incident remains powerful, not because it proves that aliens visited Washington. It remains powerful because for 2 summer nights, the American military could not confidently explain what was moving through the sky above its own capital. Whatever appeared over Washington left no physical evidence behind. It left something much harder to erase, a question that has survived for generations. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy careful, evidence-based looks at history's strangest mysteries, subscribe for more stories like this one.